Summer reading is in full swing. Visit summerreading.queenslibrary.org for our full summer reading program schedule, book list for all ages, and other resources to keep your kids engaged and learning all summer long. Plus, don't forget to participate in our reading challenge and social media sweepstakes for a chance to win some cool prizes. Queens Public Library, along with the New York City Department of Education, will be providing free lunches for all children under 18 throughout the summertime. Summer meals will be offered Monday to Friday from 1 to 2 p.m. through August 31st. Enrollment is not required and there is no cost. For more information and a list of participating libraries, visit queenslibrary.org. Back to school is around the corner. Visit queenslibrary.org to see all of our back-to-school programs and giveaways, and to read our guide with helpful tips on family communication, book lists, and more.
Welcome to Queens Public Library's talk with Jonas Poher Rasmussen, director of the three-time Academy Award-nominated feature film, Flee. The Financial Times says, Flee tells a remarkable story of displacement and survival that justifies its eclectic genre-blending approach. Bong Joon-ho, the Academy Award-winning director of Parasite, called it the most moving piece of cinema of 2021. The New York Times states, luck and loss can't be disentangled, and that may be the meaning of home that this patient, humane film arrives at. IndieWire declares, it's activism, therapy, and great cinema all at once. Hi, I'm Brian Alessandro. For those of you who don't know me, I have written for Interview Magazine, Newsday, Penk, Huffington Post, and have recently adapted Edmund White's A Boy's Own Story into a graphic novel for Top Shelf Productions, which will be released this fall. Additionally, I co-edited Fever Spores, the queer reclamation of William S. Burroughs, an anthology of essays and interviews about Burroughs for Rebel Satori Press. I'm also the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the literary journal The New Engagement. My first novel, The Unmentionable Man, was published in 2015 by Cairn Press, and my first feature film, Afghan Hound, was produced by Marriott Media in 2011 and is streaming now on Plex and soon on Tubi and Amazon. My new novel, Performer Non Grata, will be released in the spring of 2023 by Rebel Satori Press. Culture Connection, curated by Daniel Zaleski and now in its 9th year at the Queens Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. Jonas Poher Rasmussen is the writer and director of several films, including the short films Iasa, 2002, A Journey to V, 2003, Something About Halfdan, 2006, Closed Doors, 2008, The Day After in 2009, and The House of Glass in 2010, as well as the feature documentaries Searching for Bill in 2012 and What He Did in 2015. He is also the writer and director, of course, of the feature film Flee, which received Academy Award nominations for Best Documentary, Best International Feature, and Best Animated Feature, the first feature film to ever do so in the Academy's history. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Jonas.
No, but thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. Congratulations, honestly, with all of the attention and success that Flee has received in the past year since its release.
No, but thank you so much. It's really been crazy.
Absolutely. So tell us a bit about the subject of your film, Amin Nawadi, and how did you happen upon him and his story?
Well, I grew up in this very small Danish rural village. And then one day when I was 15 years old, Amin arrived to town all by himself from Afghanistan. And he stayed in foster care with a family just around the corner from where I lived. And pretty soon, we started meeting up every morning at the bus stop, going to high school. And we slowly became very good friends. And from the beginning, I was interested and curious about how and why he had come. But back then he didn't want to talk about it. And I, of course, respected that.
Sure.
But this story kind of became this black box or this secret in between us, and something that we couldn't really address for many, many years until he finally decided to open up to me, and that we record the interviews where he finally decided to share his story with the world, and we then turned it into this film.
And I love that you incorporated that relationship and that process into his story, into his childhood and his memory and his past. And we'll speak a bit more about that in a moment. I'm also very interested and curious as to how Riz Ahmed and Nikolaj Coster-Waldau, of course, everybody knows him from Game of Thrones, got involved as executive producers.
Well, it was actually an idea from our sales agent who thought that we should do a dub version of the film, and it would be great to have some big name actors to kind of be there and kind of support the film. And to be honest, I was a little reluctant in the beginning because I think there's so much storytelling, in Amin's real voice,
Sure.
and the fact that it's a real person behind the animation. But of course, to a point, the story is so important to get out there. So if we could have a dub version in English, so it's not just in Danish, which very few people speak, and also have big actors like Riz and Nikolaj come on board and support the film. Of course, it's kind of a no-brainer. So it was actually quite late in the process that they got on board. The film was almost done, and it was just before the Sundance premiere of the film back in January 21. And from the beginning, we thought Riz would be a perfect fit for Amin, both because of his background, of course, but also because he does a lot of work for representation in films.
Yes.
And it was difficult to get a hold of him,
I imagine.
So we tried all the ways possible, and in the end, some people from Vice helped us get a link to him, and he saw the film and was really happy to come on board and help, both during the dub for the film for Amin, but also to really support the film. And it was a little bit easier with Nikolaj because he lives, right over here.
Yeah. He's Danish, right? Yeah.
Danish is like 10 miles to this direction. So it was a lot easier, and my producer knows his Danish agent. So and he also does a lot of work for the UNHCR and for the Choose Love movement. So he was also really intrigued by the subject matter and the topic of the film, and really wanted to support it. So they've both been great in kind of spreading the word about the film and supporting Amin's story.
It's nice. I'm happy to hear that. It's always very affirming to see big stars throwing their power behind important stories, especially when they purport to be activists and then they put their money where their mouth is, and they work on projects that have activism at their core, such as your film. What made you decide to tell your story in this format as an animated film? Such an interesting choice to do so.
Yeah, well, I had actually asked Amin, I think like 15 years ago, if I could do a radio documentary about his story. I have a background in radio. And so I asked him if he could do a radio documentary about his story. And back then he said that he knew that he would have to share his story at some point, but he didn't feel quite ready yet. But when he would be ready, he would like to share it with me. So I think for a while I had this idea in the back of my head that this was something we could do together at some point. And then years passed, and I was invited for this workshop in Denmark called Animedocs. It's at this animation school here in Denmark, where they invite documentary filmmakers and animators to develop ideas for animated documentaries. And they asked me if I had an idea. And I thought, okay, but maybe this is a good way to tell Amin's story, because, it's a story that takes place in the past. And often when you work in documentary and you work with stories that takes place in the past, you struggle with like, how do you make this come back alive again? Yes. How do you make it compelling again?
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, but maybe this is a good way to do it. Like you can really make Afghanistan in the 80s come back alive, and Moscow in the 90s come back alive. And that ended up approached Amin, and he was really intrigued by the fact that he could be anonymous behind the animation.
Yeah, interesting.
Because he hasn't told the story to anyone, and he said he could share it with me because we've known each other for so many years, but for him to be public with the story would be difficult. because it's not easy for him to talk about these things.
That's,
So the fact that he could keep anonymity and didn't have to talk about these things, at work or at a party or, meeting someone at the supermarket who had seen the film and knew him and knew his past and would want to small talk about, his life trauma, he couldn't do that. So the fact that he could be anonymous behind animation was actually what kind of made him say, okay, but yeah, this feels like the right way to do it and also the right time.
That's great. That's a very interesting insight that sort of provided him a little bit of a like a safety net on some level, like a little bit of a cushion that you'd be able to tell his story unabashedly without censoring himself or being self-conscious or reticent, right? So it freed him up to be even more honest.
Yeah, because he could control, over when he wanted to talk about these things,
Right.
because now it's out there. Now he can talk about it.
Yeah.
But he wants to keep control over when he feels ready to do so.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. How does Amin define the concept of home? What it means to him? I thought that was very interesting. He meditates a bit on this concept of home, and
Yeah.
of course, as a refugee, that's a very complex idea. With those,
Yeah, and I think it's really the circumstance of the refugees. It is that they had no home,
right?
and I think for him, that place has been lost or was lost for many years. Also after he came to Denmark, because he never felt quite safe. He never felt at home anywhere because he was always feeling uncertain about what if people knew the real story, what would happen then. So that was also a part of the process of making the film, was to figure out what kind of legal issues were there for him.
Sure.
So we got his file and had an attorney look at it. And immediately he said that Amin was given asylum when he arrived to Denmark, not because of his background story, but because he was an underage refugee from a war-torn country. Amin just didn't know that. So he kind of stayed with this fake story for all these years, but he actually didn't have to. But
say his age. I'm sorry. Well, how old was he again when he arrived in Denmark?
He was 15.
15. Okay, yes, thank you.
Yeah. So I think, the film is called Flee, and it is, of course, about the physical flight going from Afghanistan to Denmark. But it's even more so, about this guy looking for a place in the world where he can be who he is, with everything that it entails, because he's fled himself for all these years. When he was young in Afghanistan, he couldn't be open about his sexuality, so he had to hide that. And then when he arrived in Denmark, he couldn't be open, or he felt like he couldn't be open about his past, so he had to hide that. So, he's always been fleeing some parts of himself. And I think for him, the notion of home is that place in the world where he can be who he is, with everything that it entails, with his sexuality, with his past, and everything he's been through.
Sure. I really appreciated the intersectional properties of his plight. You spoke about recreating 1980s era Afghanistan, and you do so marvelously in the film. Can you talk to our viewers a little bit about what Afghanistan in the 1980s during Amin's youth was like, what with the Civil War and everything going on there? And
yeah, but Afghanistan has such a complex history, and at the point, like in Amin's childhood in the 80s, most of the time Kabul was a pretty safe place. It was under communist rule, but women could go to university. You had maternity leave. You had lots of things that you wouldn't think of when you think about Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But that was inside Kabul, and then outside you had the civil war going on between the communist rule of Afghanistan and the Mujahideen, the later Taliban. So the war was kind of always there, but not inside the city where Amin grew up. So for him, his childhood was kind of a happy time. The family did pretty well for themselves, and he went to school and got educated, and had friends and played volleyball and all these things. But then, of course, the war moved closer and closer, and then when the Soviets kind of withdraw from the country, it left them alone with the Mujahideen, who took over and established Taliban.
Yeah, I thought that those two worlds, until until Russia had pulled out and the Mujahideen had moved in, were so stark. The way you represented it with him, it's literally bouncing through the streets of Kabul, wearing his sister's dress, listening to music, and very happy and free, and this sort of horror going on in the backdrop until it encroached. Can you tell me a little bit about, or tell our viewers a little bit about Amin's father and the communist government of Afghanistan in the 80s? Can you go a little bit deeper into that and how it related to his father?
Yeah, it's hard to really say why they took him away, because no one really knows. They didn't get any info at all. But what happened was that when the communists kind of took over the country and tore down the royal family, or took away the royal family, they also kind of found, like, I think it's around 6,000 academics and people who they saw as a threat, and who they thought would kind of fight the communist rule. And most of those people disappeared. Mm-hmm. And Amin's father was one of them. Mm-hmm. And it's a big trauma within the family, because they never got told why, and they never got told what happened to him. Just one day he disappeared. And for years and years they hoped that they would get him back, or that he would show up, or in some miraculous way that he would kind of turn up.
Sure.
But he didn't. So it's a big family trauma, but they don't know exactly why. He was well educated and had been to university, and had also been to the army and was a pilot. So he was a pretty big figure in Kabul and in Afghanistan. So I think they just didn't want to take a chance that he could become someone who would kind of fight.
To that point, to the subject of family, your film goes into how for a long time Amin believed that his family, particularly his two sisters and brother, were dead for years, right? But they kept the secret that they had survived the harrowing trafficking. And was the asylum a lie, or the Russian traffickers told them to say that they were Russian and had no family, that their family was dead, right? There was all this kind of involvement and manipulation and secret keeping and lying on some level. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, no, but it's really, the human traffickers, they don't really know the law. Yeah. So they just kind of give out stories and try to make them as dramatic as possible, because that kind of gives the best chance of people to be able to stay. So they told Amin that you have to say that all your family is dead, and that you travel all by yourself from Afghanistan directly to Denmark, because then you will have a better chance of kind of getting asylum, which wasn't the case. Like he would, if he had told a real story, he would also have gotten asylum.
Sure.
But they didn't know that, so they just kind of give out these stories, give out these fake stories, in order to kind of be on the safe side themselves.
To ensure asylum, sure. Yeah. I was really moved by and really impressed by how you weave the interview with Amin with the casual, intimate conversations and the relationship between you and him, and, like, as I said earlier, his past and his story, his plight. It has almost like a meta quality, really, to it. Can you talk to us a little bit about that decision to integrate those elements, to sort of take a step back from Amin's story in childhood and kind of bring yourself and your relationship with him into the story? I thought that was really a bold and very successful decision, by the way. But what made you decide to do that?
It was never really a question of not doing it. It really came natural, because to me, this is not. It didn't start out being me wanting to do a refugee story, and then I went out and found a refugee. This really comes from the friendship.
Sure.
It comes from me being curious about my friend's story for so many years, and I think I also wanted to show that in the film and have the friendship in there, because I wanted him not to be put in the refugee box. First of all, he's a human being.
Yes.
And I could tell that through the friendship. You as an audience, you get to laugh with us. You get to kind of, get in on our kind of jokes, and that we both, love to watch Jean-Claude Van Damme films, but for different reasons.
I love that. I thought that was great. Yeah.
But because we have the friendship, that's possible, and you get that side of him, and one of the first things he said when I asked him about doing the film, he said that he didn't want to be a victim. He didn't want to be victimized. So I thought, okay, but maybe because I'm telling the story from the inside of the friendship, maybe I'm able to give a more, human perspective to it.
And as I said, you've done that very successfully because, there are all these binaries, right? He's gay, you're straight, he's Afghan, you're Danish, he's a refugee, you're not. But those sort of like designations didn't really matter. I like the way you collapsed all of them. And it was just a story about friendship. And it was really poignant and really beautiful. And I love the way you bonded over Jean-Claude Van Damme, for example. Like, this item of pop culture became this very meaningful moment. So Jonas, we want to take a little break because I want to show the trailer. I want to share the trailer with our viewers. So Eve is going to start that whenever you're ready, and we'll just sit back and watch.
Prøv en lille smule længere op. Bare lidt. Så hvis du ligesom lukker øjnene nu, og prøver at trække vejret sådan dybt ind. Hvad betyder ordet hjem for dig?
Hjem er noget, som er trygt.
Kaboul, les attaques des Moudjahidines repris.
Har du nogensinde fortalt din livshistorie før?
Nej. Vi skal ud. Det er nu. Lidt dårligt samvittighed, at min bror han bliver tilbage. Vi flygtede med menneskesmuglerne. Det værste mennesker i mit liv.
Har du fortalt Kasper nogle af de her historier overhovedet?
Nej. Det tager tid at stole på folk. Det går ondt at tænke tilbage. Så det er min fortid, og det jeg kan ikke flygte fra det, og jeg har heller ikke lyst. Jeg kan mærke, at der skal ske noget. Her starter jo min historie.
It's really terrific. Can you discuss the trafficking itself, Jonas? What that experience, what it was like for? I mean, maybe how it has stayed with him, how it has shaped him, and into the adult that he's become. This tremendously intellectual and accomplished adult,
Yeah. But I think there's many things in that, and one thing is, the great support he had from his family, and how crucial that was for him to succeed in both getting to Denmark and getting out of both Afghanistan and Russia, because he had family who supported him. But also afterwards, because they kind of because of him, his brother didn't get the same opportunities. Because of him, his older brother had to spend all his money on kind of getting him out of Russia. So he didn't get his own family. He had a girlfriend and wanted kids and a family, but he couldn't do that because all the money he earned, he sent that to Russia to get his family out. And because of these things, he has had this enormous guilt to succeed and to do well, because he felt he had to repay his family for what they had done for him to be able to succeed in life.
Sure.
So, I know no one who worked as hard as he does. In high school, he would get up at 5 a.m. and go to the swimming pool where he worked as a lifeguard, and work until he had to show up at school, and then be in school, and then go back to work afterwards, then go home, do homework,
Wow.
and then go to bed and get up in the morning,
Again, sure.
And he got better grades than me in high school, even though he'd just been in Denmark for a year and a half,
Wow.
before he started high school. So I know no one who works as hard as he does. And I think a lot of that is because of this guilt he felt. Like he felt he needed to pay his family back for what they'd done to help him. But of course, also, I think, there's so many traumas that he carried around afterwards. And the sense of trusting people, it took a long time for him to start being able to trust people again.
Sure.
And he still has issues, and I think it's something that will stay with him forever, and that he will keep on working on, trusting people. But it's difficult when you as a kid see the world, tumble and disappear underneath your feet, and then having to rebuild. It takes a long time, and it really destroys your faith in other people. And it takes a long time to rebuild that.
Amin's trajectory was like seemingly interminable. Like can you talk our viewers who haven't yet seen the film through? It was from Afghanistan to Russia to Estonia, and then back after being intercepted. Right? It was actually quite convoluted on some level, right? Can you just walk us through very quickly what his path was?
Yeah, so when the civil war happened in Afghanistan, they had nowhere to go other than Russia, because that was the only country in the world that would give them a tourist visa.
Sure.
So they went to Moscow, and as soon as the tourist visa didn't work anymore, they were illegal immigrants. And this was just after the wall had come down. So Russia was a mess, and there was so much corruption. So the police tried to pressure them for money, and it was really difficult to live there. So they just kind of got stuck in this apartment in Russia because they had no papers. And then slowly, the family that was abroad in Sweden gathered money and paid human traffickers to help them get out. But they had difficult tries that went horribly wrong. Both with the sisters who nearly died in this container where they couldn't breathe, going from Estonia to Sweden, and also Amin himself, who both got caught and got in prison, or in this kind of prison / refugee camp in Estonia, and actually had other tries as well that also failed, but we couldn't put everything in the film. So it's just, it's just a mess, because you're in the hands of these cynical human traffickers who don't really count your life for anything. They just see you as a way of earning money, and don't really care if you succeed. Really, they just see you as a way of earning money.
Yeah.
So to know that your life is in the hands of these kind of people, it was. I didn't know anything when we started making the film. So what you hear in the film, what you see, is the very first time he tells me these stories.
Wow.
And I didn't know anything. I knew that he'd lived in Russia for a while, and I had a sense that he had some family in Sweden, but that was it. So when he started to open up, I was just kind of like, wow.
Wow. And to be clear, you had met him when you were about 15, 16,
Yeah.
And the film was made maybe 3 years ago, a little bit longer.
Yeah, well, the film was done 2 years ago, but we started because it was a long process of making the film. So we started back in, I think the first interviews is dated back in 2014.
So a good maybe 20 years or so of your friendship before you were finally able to get this out of him. Wow.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
Yeah.
Amin had to wait many years, right, before he could be reunited with his siblings in Stockholm. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about that? Say a little more about that.
Yeah, but he arrived in Denmark, and he told that his entire family had died in the civil war in Afghanistan, and that he was there all alone. So he was in Denmark, and he had some relatives, he had some siblings in Sweden, but he couldn't go. First, in the beginning, because he didn't have a passport. He couldn't leave the country. He was just in Denmark, and then finally, when he got a passport, he had to kind of have a good excuse to go to Sweden. And people were like, but what, because he was in foster care of the family, and they're like, but why do you want to go to Sweden? So for a long time, he couldn't go because there was no good explanation for why he would have to go to Sweden. And then in the end, he kind of made up a good excuse, and he took a trip, and that's what you see in the film where he finally goes over there.
Amin thought for a long time, right, when he was a child, that his homosexuality could be cured. And how was he treated as a child in Kabul? And talk to us a little bit about how he used to wear his sister's clothing in public. Was there ever a fuss made about that? I mean, you get some sort of sideways glances from people in public in the film early on, in the first 5 minutes. But did he ever go into what that level of acceptance or lack thereof was like for him?
I think like most of people just kind of made a joke out of it, or here's him in his dress again, and it was okay. But he said he had relatives, more kind of conservative relatives, a bit further out, who didn't look at it with they looked at it with contempt, and said that he needed to be a man, and he needed to, because he loved to be with his mother. He loved to help her with the dishes and washing clothes and all these things. And some of his relatives were like, "That's not a man's job. You need to do something else. You shouldn't wear a dress. You shouldn't do this and that." And also, what you see in the film, the sisters collect these Bollywood cards with like actors on it, and normally the girls would collect male Bollywood actors, and the guys would collect female Bollywood actors. Sure. But Amin also collected male Bollywood actors. And so, I think as you see in the film, the family kind of knew all along that was kind of the direction, like that he was gay.
I was moved by that they accepted it, and they had seemed to have always known.
Yeah. And just, what he also says in the film, in Afghanistan, you don't have a word for being gay.
Right.
You do have words, but it's it's negative words. It's what you kind of call someone in a negative way, but you don't have a neutral word for being gay in Afghanistan. So they couldn't really address it. It's not something they would talk about. And of course, it's not accepted in society, so they just didn't talk about it.
Right. We spoke a bit about how Amin made his education and career a priority, including his position as a postdoctoral researcher in Princeton University, to honor his sibling's sacrifice. Can you talk a little bit more about some of his accomplishments?
But as I said, he's just a really, really hard worker, and I think talking for myself at least, high school was kind of a years where, yes, I went to school, but also just had fun with my friends, but he was very kind of, focused and just moving on to the next thing, and just did really well and just worked really, really hard. And he's been to very big universities, both in Europe and in the US, and has done very well for himself, and has a name that people listen to, when he talk about what he's an expert in. And I can't really disclose what he's an expert in, because then it's too easy to figure out who he is.
Sure, of course.
An Afghan gay Danish citizen who's an expert in this, then you know who it is.
Absolutely, that's understandable. Can you talk to us a little bit about Kasper, Amin's partner, and his involvement?
But at the same time I started doing the interviews with Amin about his past, I also followed him around in his everyday life on what was going on. And of course, Kasper was a big part of that.
Sure.
And pretty soon I saw, that they had this thing that Kasper really wanted to find a place where they could settle down. He wanted to buy a house. And I thought, okay, but this really actually kind of fits the story quite well, because it is about home. It is about finding that place in the world where you feel this is where I belong. And for many years, I had this feeling, I had this sense that Amin was still fleeing, that he was still moving from place to place, and he was always kind of on the move and always going somewhere else, and he never seemed satisfied where he was. He was always going somewhere else. So I thought, okay, but I'm gonna follow and see how this goes, how this, looking for this house with Casper goes, because either, it can be, a happy end and they find a place and everything's great, but it could also be a tragedy, that, I mean, in the end, it's not able to settle down and will continue fleeing. But both of the endings would be kind of something that talks into his refugee experience as well.
I really, speaking on the subject of anonymity, I was very impressed that you went to the lengths that you went to make sure that certain people that were involved in the film, that their identities are obscured for their safety. Was that a very challenging or arduous process when working with so many people? So it requires so many people to make a film, of course, right? Hundreds of people. Was that difficult to protect their identity?
No, not really. We had a very small core creative team who kind of, had access, because everything in the film is also shot on video.
Sure.
So the core creative team, which was me, the editor, the animation director, and the art director, we had access to the material, so they knew how he looked. But other than that, no one had access. So we kept it really close. And then from there, no one kind of knew what he looked like. I never met him. And actually, I think it's just maybe a handful of the entire team who's ever met Amin.
Wow. So your film has been universally acclaimed. I hope I don't embarrass you by saying all this, but it's true. And it's received an unprecedented 3 Academy Award nominations for Best International Feature, Best Animated Feature, and Best Documentary. How has this extremely warm reception felt? I mean, particularly those 3 Oscar nominations, which was a first, as I understand it. You're in the record books now, Jonas.
Yeah. No, but it's crazy. This project started out being a conversation between me and my friend in my living room in Copenhagen, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember like some of the initial talks we had. We thought, okay, but if this is going to be something that could play on Danish local TV, then we've done well, So to see it at the Academy Awards, being nominated for 3 Oscars, it was just it's been a crazy ride, and to be in that room and to be with all those celebrities that you just been used to see on screen, and all of a sudden you sit next to Steven Spielberg and Nicole Kidman. It's been crazy, like being a guy from rural Denmark and to all of a sudden end up there.
Well, it's very much earned, and I really do love that it started with this intimate conversation between 2 friends in a living room, and it's become this international phenomena. Yeah. I just want to tell everyone we'll be taking questions for Jonas shortly, so please start sending them in. You could just type them into the comment section. I still have a few more questions of my own, Jonas. So how long did it take you to make Flee? You said you started the process in 2014?
I think the workshop I talked about in the beginning that kind of initiated the whole thing was in the end of 2013. So that's kind of where the whole thing started. So it's almost 10 years ago. But of course, I didn't work full time on it all those years, because it took a long time just to convince people that we should animate this thing, and people were like, why do you want to animate it? And it's so expensive to animate, and so it took a long time to convince people that not only was this possible, but it was the right way to do it, and actually the only way we could do it. And then also, Amin needed to be ready. For the first year and a half, we had this agreement that he could always walk out, and we would make the film. That I said, but because he had never talked about these things before, he'd never told the story before. So I told him, but let's just start out and see how it goes. And if you feel like it isn't working for you, then we won't do it. And then slowly, he opened up, and it was a long process. I did around 20 interviews with him during the span of like around 4 years, I think. And in the beginning, I kind of got the broad strokes, and then slowly he would go deeper and deeper into things. In the beginning, he wasn't able to talk about everything, but slowly, he would be ready to open up about everything.
Is it probably? Do you think it was therapeutic for him?
It was. And I didn't realize that until we actually started doing the interviews. The reason why he's laying down in the film is this technique of interviewing I learned when I did radio. Because when you do radio, you don't have an image, so you need your subject to be really descriptive in their way of talking. So by having him laying down and close his eyes and talk present tense, instead of kind of just retelling what happened, he kind of relives these memories. So every time we would dive into memory, I would ask him to start out describing the room he was in, his childhood home, his room in his childhood home. What did he have on the walls? What were the colors? What did the windows look like? What did he see outside the window? And all these details would give the animators a lot to work from, but also it would bring him back in a specific situation, and he would start to recall things he had otherwise forgotten. And so the reason why he's laying down is because of this technique of interviewing, and not because I thought it was going to be therapeutic. But then at the first interview, he said, "This is going to be therapeutic for me."
He did. It's almost Freudian too. It's almost like psychoanalytic on some level.
Yeah.
And the next obvious question is, has Amin seen the film, and what did he say? What were his...
He has seen the film. He has seen the film many times now. But of course, the first time we saw the film, we saw it together, just two of us and Casper. And after the credits had kind of rolled past, and we just sat silent for a little bit, and then he looked at me and he said, "I don't know if this is a good film. I'm not the one to ask." Because he said, I can't separate, my own emotions to my own story from the filmmaking.
Interesting.
I get very moved by it, but I don't know what is, me watching my own trauma as an animated film, or if it's because of the filmmaking. So he was really happy when it premiered at Sundance and won the Grand Jury Prize there. And saw the reactions, because I think he had been a little concerned if people would be able to relate to his story, because he is, kind of double marginalized, if people would be able to relate anyway. So to see people relate to it and to be moved by his story has really meant a lot to him. Also because, for him growing up, he didn't have a lot of stories where he felt represented. So for him to be able to give his own story to the world, so people, the millions and millions of people who have similar stories as him, have something where they feel represented, is really meaningful to him.
Something so powerful about just being listened to, and being heard. So we have a bunch of questions coming in. Congratulations on such a beautiful and moving documentary, Jonas. Can you tell us where you were when you got the news that Flea was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, and what went through your mind?
I can, and it's actually, I think it's out there somewhere. There's a video clip of it.
Like a reaction? Yeah.
the reaction, yeah. I don't remember what went through my mind. I remember at the beginning, I was really nervous because there was so much hype around the film.
Sure.
And I was really nervous that we wouldn't get any nominations. So I remember when we got the first nomination, it was just a huge relief, because I thought, okay, we did it. Like we got the nomination, and it was just such a relief, because there was so much hype around the film, especially in Denmark, because we're such a small country. So to have a film that could potentially be nominated for 3 Oscars was crazy. And then when we got the second and the third, which is kind of, I couldn't feel my body at all.
I have a question about Denmark and Danish filmmaking. I'm a big fan of Lars von Trier. Has he reached out? Have you spoken to him? Has he spoken to you about the film? Has he seen it?
I don't know if he has seen it. Lars von Trier is a very private man.
Yes, yes.
So I don't know if he's seen it, or if he liked it.
Okay.
I talked to Thomas Vinterberg, who really loved it.
Oh, good. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the global response to Flea? Were you surprised by any of the international responses?
I think I had a feeling when we made the film that we were doing something special. But you never know what the reaction is going to be. And I had that feeling before, and people didn't really agree, So to see the way the film has traveled has really been amazing, and that people from Denmark to the States to Japan to Hungary to Chile, all over the world, watching the film, getting moved by it has really been amazing to experience and to see that this is a story that resonates with people, and also people who neither gay or refugees, but just kind of see, okay, but this is a humane story.
Yeah.
I think it's really been incredible to,
universal.
Yeah.
Will Amin be listening to our program tonight? Please say hello from Culture Connection. Do you know if he's going to be watching?
I'm not sure. We've done a lot of Q&As, so I think he's kind of tired of.
He's kind of tired of it, I'm sure. Well, feel free to share this after it's archived if you like.
But I promise I'll say hello and say that it's out there and he might watch.
Do you feel anything was lost by using animation instead of the real person?
It's always hard to say, I know a lot of things that we gained from it, but if we lost something, I don't know. I think there's so many of these kind of stories out there, and I think it's because it's such a harrowing story, and I think the fact that it's animated kind of eases it up a little bit, and you're able to talk about things that you normally kind of would say, okay, I can't cope with this, especially if you look at a person in the flesh who are suffering, it's difficult.
Sure.
Because you feel the need to help, but you can't. But here, because you have this kind of filter of animation, I think you listen more. At least for me, I have a tendency to block things out because there's so many stories, so many harrowing stories in the news, in our news feeds, in the newspapers, all the time. And I block a lot of it out because I can't cope with it.
So much, yeah.
But I think the fact that you have him animated kind of makes it easier to watch. If something's lost, some people feel they lose connection. But I think, to me, it's the opposite. I think the fact that you have the real voice underneath the animation kind of makes you listen more and kind of pay attention to what's being said in a different way.
It amplifies it on some level, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if you can answer this question because you were trying to. So I'll ask though. But what does that mean? Field of research? Can you say, or do you not feel comfortable? It's okay if you don't.
No, because I would love to share it, but it's super easy to find him. And
sure.
I promise to keep him anonymous.
That's admirable. I'm just curious now. Have you had since this film has sort of made its international debut at the Sundance Film Festival, which is a very popular American film festival, a year and a half ago, have you been able to develop a sense of how filmmaking in Denmark or Europe or Scandinavia generally is different from filmmaking or the film industry in the United States? Have you been able to uncover a difference?
I think, yes, definitely. I think there's something about the system here in Denmark, because it's governmentally funded, all of it, which makes that it's very auteur driven, and as a director you have final cut here always.
That's great.
And that's a big difference from the US, where very few directors have final cut.
Oh yeah.
And it's not always for the best, but it's a big difference. And of course, because you have these kind of soft money where you there's funds that's given out, and they don't need the film to be commercial.
Mm-hmm.
They just they say, make your film. If it makes money, that's great, but it's not why we do it. It's not why we give you the money. We don't need to get money back. That's of course a big difference, because there's a possibility to be more kind of bold in the way you tell your story.
More experimental and provocative and daring. Could we have a Michael Haneke or Lars von Trier in the United States with these $90 million budgets? I don't think so. You wouldn't be able to take those risks.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, there's such amazing possibilities in the US because you have bigger money, you have a bigger kind of, there's it's difficult for European films to compete because in the end, it's just a bigger machine in the US, and so there's some amazing possibilities in making films in the US.
Yeah, for sure.
To make things happen.
Can you talk about what you're working on now? I know you're adapting the Danish graphic novels of Halfdan Piske. Am I pronouncing the name correctly?
Yeah, correct. I have them right here, actually. I'm in my office, so this is one of them.
Oh, wow, that's great art.
Yeah,
I love the aesthetic.
Yeah, so that's one thing I'm working on right now.
Will this be a film or a series?
It's a film, like 3 different kind of graphic novels that I'm turning into a scripted narrative animated film.
Okay. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
You tend to really be drawn very much to the visual and to animation and to aesthetics. How much? What was the animation process like with your film? Right? Were you very involved in the look of it, or did you have an animator who presented you with an idea of what it should look like?
It was very much a collaboration between the art director and the animation director and me. But I was a big part of the whole thing. But it was between the 3 of us to really find the style of animation that could kind of support the story and support Amin's testimony. And it took a long time to find the style of animation, and we did a bunch of tests and a bunch of research and looked at graphical art, at painters, at other animated films, at live action films, and just kind of did this big art bible in the kind of showed how we wanted to portray this film. But it was a very long process to find the style.
Oh, it's gorgeous. So it really paid off. Jonas, thank you so much for this. It's been a real pleasure, and we're honored to host. I should tell everyone, this is very important, that Flea will be available to stream from now until Sunday, and the link to access the film will be put into the comment section, so you can access it there. Here it is. The distribution company Neon made it available to all of you until Sunday, so please take advantage of it. Watch it if you haven't. If you have, watch it again. I enjoyed watching it for a second time this past week. And to learn more about Flea, you could also go to the website fleamovie.com. So thank you all for joining us. Have a nice weekend. And Jonas, again, thank you so much. And congratulations.
Thanks for having me.
Take care, everyone. Have a good night.